Welcome, Puyaka Puyaka. I'm your host, Tijani Musa, and this is Verdad Duele Podcast. I want to take this time to record an episode to explain to people some of the processes that a vaccine goes through before being authorized in the United States. And also in this discussion, I'll talk about some of the steps that the FDA uses in order for a drug to become available in the market for the United States population and the world to use it. And the reason why I am doing this episode is because there are a bunch of misinformation and disinformation that are going around about these vaccines that are being out. The Pfizer vaccine, the Pfizer and BioNTech vaccine, and Moderna. And so I want to record this episode so that people have the right information to make the right decision. Because in the United States, there isn't going to be a federal mandate forcing you to take the vaccine, because that's not how things are done in the United States. So it is going to be up to you, the individual person, to make a decision that is best for you, for your family, and the people you love. And so I want to make this episode available so that you make that informed decision that is best for you, and not making the decision based on misinformation and based on conspiracy theories that are going around with bad information. And so let's get started. Let's get to it. And so when a drug becomes available, FDA, the Food Drug Administration, goes through different phases in order for this drug to become available in the market. And so there are something called clinical studies that goes behind the scene that the FDA approves for the drug to become to come to us, for us to be able to use that drug. And so phase one of this efficacy. But before we get started, I also want to disclaim that this explanation is not detailed or in depth. I am just simply just explaining briefly what the process is so that people have good information to make informed decision about themselves. And so phase one of this clinical studies includes efficacy studies on healthy volunteers. Phase two is clinical studies on limited scale. Phase three is comparative studies on large scale number of patients. And then the sponsors of the drug apply for what they call the new drug application, the NDA. And then when the NDA is submitted, the FDA, the Food Drug Administration, then reviews the NDA and then takes the next step. And then phase three continues with comparative studies, registration, and market introduction of that drug. So the drug has to go through all the different stages. And then when it gets to phase three, that's when the drug gets the registration to be marketed and for the consumers to use. And so let's talk into more detail about the different phases. Phase one typically involves about 20 to 80 healthy volunteers. They try to avoid including people that are pregnant or childbearing potential so that they don't get involved, because the drug is a new drug. They don't want to put that baby or the mother into any kind of danger. And emphasis in phase one is drug safety. The goal is to identify major side effects, metabolism, and routes of excretion of the drug. And then this phase one studies or clinical study last for about 1 year. About 70% of drugs will pass phase one. Phase two typically involves about 100 to 300 individuals who have the target disease. And so they are getting people directly from the population that are infected with the disease, and then they use the new drug as an experiment on them to see how that drug affects them. And so the emphasis in phase two is effectiveness. Patients receiving the drug are compared to similar patients receiving a placebo or another drug. This lasts about 2 years. About 33% of drugs in the United States pass phase two. Phase three typically involves 1,000 to 3,000 patients. The emphasis on phase three is on safety and effectiveness. This is where investigation goes through well-controlled studies with different populations and different dosages, as well as uses new drug in combination with other drugs to try to find out how this drug affects or interacts with other drugs. And this phase three lasts for about 3 years. About 25 to 30% of drugs passes phase three. And then there's a formula right here that says that 70 times 33 times 25 equals to 5. So essentially around 5% of drugs would pass phase three of clinical trial in the United States before it goes into the market. So it is a very intense process that these drugs go through or vaccines go through in order to become available to the market. And so it's not just, you don't just wake up today or tomorrow and say, oh, I'm going to create a drug and then I'm going to put it out in the market. It doesn't work like that. It has to go through clinical trials. It has to go through tests, and the review board, the FDA review board reviews the drug, investigates the drug, and then go through the different phases in order for that drug to come to the market. And the panel of the review board consists of people in the best people that the U.S. has to offer in the top of their careers, the top of science, scientists, radiologists, just informed individuals that are at the top of their game are in that review board to make sure that that drug, before it hits the market, has been vetted properly for the American people. And so, and then the pre-NDA period, like I said, NDA is the new drug application. That's where the FDA and the drug sponsors meet. And then submission of NDA happens. And then that takes on the formal step asking the FDA to consider approving a drug for marketing. And then the FDA would have about 60 days to decide whether it will file it for approval consideration. So just because you apply for a new drug application does not mean that the FDA would have to take that application. It is up to the FDA based on information that they have about that specific drug or vaccine. It is up to them to decide whether or not they want to file the NDA. If filed, a review team is assigned to evaluate the new drug, like I was saying earlier. The FDA's role: the review team evaluates the research on the safety of the drug and its effectiveness. The FDA reviews the information to go on the drug label. It inspects the facilities where the drug will be manufactured. The application will be classified as approvable or not approvable. So at the end of the day, when the sponsors applies for that NDA, the new drug application, if that NDA is filed and the FDA does what it does, like investigation and evaluating, inspecting the facility, then they have two options. First option is approvable, and the second option is not approvable. So the FDA at the end of the day has the power to either approve or not approve a drug. The FDA then would invite experts panel for inputs on drug safety and effectiveness. And then if the drug is approved or the vaccine is approved, the FDA requests additional information from the sponsor. The NDA is again reviewed. Following drug approval, sponsors of the drug will be required to continually assess the safety of that drug. And then phase four is the post-market surveillance of the drug to continually assess the safety of the drug. This is when the drug is in the market already. And so the FDA continues to monitor the drug to make sure that there are no side effects that have not already been evaluated. If there are any side effects, the providers are consistently updating the FDA about that drug. And then phase four may include incidence and severity of rare adverse reactions, cost effectiveness analysis, compare, comparative trials, comparative trials, and quality of life studies. So essentially, the summary for drug development and evaluation, it goes through different phases from phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 to phase 4. And the reason why these steps are being taken care of is to protect the the population, to protect the United States, the citizens, to protect people that live in the United States and around the world. So the FDA goes through these rigorous steps to ensure that that specific drug or that specific vaccine is a good vaccine for the American people before they put it out there in the market. And even when it's on the market, they continue to evaluate and assess that drug. And so the reason why this is important is because I want you to know that you have the right information to make that decision for yourself, whether or not to take the vaccine, because at the end of the day, the decision lies upon you. And so let's talk briefly about FDA Emergency Use Authorization, because this has been coming up a lot in the news. You hear a lot about EUA, EUA. EUA is essentially the Emergency Use Authorization. This is an authority that allows the FDA to help strengthen the nation's public health protections against CBRN, which is the chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats, by facilitating the availability and use of MCMs, which are the mid-contract management needed during the public health emergencies. And the thing about emergency use authorization is, after the emergency ends, the FDA has the authority to end the use. So for these vaccines that are being authorized right now, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine and Moderna, after COVID-19 ends or subsides, it is within the FDA's authority to end the use of those vaccines and send them back to the lab to go through uh, additional assessment, additional testing. So it is just in a case of an emergency that the FDA authorizes EUA for use to try to protect the American people. Let's explain EUA more. Under an EUA, the FDA may allow the use of unapproved medical products or approve uses of approved medical products in an emergency to diagnose, treat, or prevent serious or life-threatening diseases or conditions when certain statutory criteria have been met, including that there are no adequate, approved, and available alternatives. Taking into consideration input from the FDA, manufacturers decide whether and when to submit an EUA request to the FDA. So let me say this again. The reason why the FDA would authorize an EUA is if there is there are no adequate, approved, and available alternatives. In this case, with COVID-19, we do not have an approved, adequate, and available alternatives to heal or protect the American people. And so, because of that, the EUA authorizes uh, Pfizer and BioNTech and Moderna vaccines to be used as an emergency purposes to diagnose, to treat, or prevent serious or life-threatening diseases or conditions, so that the American people are best protected with the new vaccine. And that is the reason why you hear a lot about EUA. So once the EUA is submitted, FDA will evaluate the EUA request and determine whether the relevant statutory criteria are met, taking into account the totality of the scientific evidence about the vaccine that is available to FDA. So recent EUA approval, 2020 Lucira Health, GenScript USA, and then there have been also numerous uh, EUA approvals in the past. And so that includes anthrax EUA, the Ebola virus EUA, ento, the Ebola virus EUA, H7N9 influenza, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus, that is MERS-CoV, and then nerve agent EUA and the Zika virus EUA. These are just examples of EUA that have been approved in the past to try to attend to emergency situations that are going on, just like the coronavirus. EUA approval of vaccine. For an EUA to be issued for a vaccine for which there is no adequate manufacturing information to ensure quality and consistency, the FDA must determine that the known and potential benefits outweigh the known and potential risks of the vaccine. Let me say this again. For the EUA to be approved for a vaccine, the FDA must determine that the known and potential benefits outweigh the known and potential risks of the vaccine. And so that is why Pfizer and BioNTech and Moderna vaccine were authorized, because the FDA did the assessment. They found out that the known benefits definitely outweigh the known potential risks, and that is why they authorize these vaccines to be out there for the American people and the world to use. An EUA request for a COVID-19 vaccine can be submitted to the FDA based on a final analysis of a phase 3 clinical efficacy trial or an interim analysis of such trial. And so we have a new term here, efficacy. Let's define what efficacy is. The word efficacy is used in pharmacology and medicine to refer both to the maximum response achievable from a pharmaceutical drug in research settings and to the capacity for sufficient therapeutic effect or beneficial change in clinical settings. That's what efficacy is. Some people use the word efficacy to also mean effectiveness. And so those two terms are usually used interchangeably. And so for phase 3 clinical efficacy trial or an interim analysis of such trial, for example, an analysis performed before the planned end of the trial once the data have met the pre-specified success criteria for the study's primary efficacy endpoint. And so the EUA approval process is very, very extensive. And so I also want to highlight that in order for a vaccine to get to that clinical trial phase 3, clinical trial phase 3 does not need to be completed for EUA approval, but phase 3 data need to include a median follow-up of at least 2 months. At least 2 months. That's what this slide is saying right here. From a safety perspective, FDA expects an EUA submission would include all safety data accumulated from phase 1 and phase 2 studies conducted with the vaccine, with an expectation that phase 3 data would include a median follow-up of at least 2 months, meaning that at least half of the vaccine recipients in phase 3 clinical trials have at least 2 months of follow-up after completion of the full vaccination regimen. In addition, FDA expects that an EUA request would include a phase 3 safety database of well over 3,000 vaccine recipients. And so with these vaccines that are out there, they have already gone through these phases. They have had over 3,000 people with the virus, with coronavirus, that have participated in the study. And then the benefits outweigh the potential risks of the vaccine. And that is the reason why it's being promoted in the media as well as in providers and hospitals and clinics to be used to the American people. And so these are some of the steps that a drug or a vaccine takes in order to get to the market. And so additional information can be learned by going through the FDA's website and or also going through CDC to gather more information. Let's finish up with this episode by saying that the emergency use authorization for vaccines to prevent COVID-19, this was a press release by the FDA. The FDA plays a critical role in protecting the United States from threats such as emerging infectious diseases, including the coronavirus, disease 2019 pandemic. FDA is committed to providing timely guidance to support response efforts to this pandemic. And so at the end of the day, it is not in the best interest of the American people for the FDA to allow use of tests that does not work as it should. So it is not in the best interest of the FDA and the American people to put out a vaccine out there that does not work or does the intended job that is prescribed for it. It's not in the best interest of the FDA or the American people. And so, like I said, you can find out more information about the vaccines by going to the FDA's website or the CDC's website to find out more information. I wanted to record this episode so that you have good information to decide whether or not it is the best decision for you to use the vaccines that are out there. I don't want you to be out there making this decision based on conspiracy theories, based on misinformation, based on disinformation, and based on bad information that is spreading, because we know that there are going to be this type of information that are out there that people are putting out there to try to confuse the general public about these vaccines. I myself, Tijani, I when it is my time to take the vaccine, I have full confidence in the vaccine, and I'll be ready to take the vaccine because I know that the United States has done its job to protect the public, and we have been longing for the vaccine to come to us. And now that the vaccine is here, it's only right. It only makes sense that we actually take this vaccine to protect the people around us, to protect ourselves, and protect our loved ones. And if you like this episode, please leave us a review on Apple, and then also leaving us a review on YouTube so that other people can find out this information and be able to use this information. And so share this information with your friends, your loved ones, so that everybody is well informed and be in a position to make a well informed decision. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next episode.